What is this?
So I think a big part of like this election and everyone being confused and upset and stuff like that is because we had a really stupid idea that we knew what we were talking about. I mean, people have been saying, well, like if you look at pollsters have been saying for months that things are incredibly close. Incredibly close. And if you look at all these pictures of Harris's rallies and Trump's empty rallies, you're like, how is this even close? There's a huge selection bias. The whole problem with the world today, this is why things are so divisive, is because we're no longer living in the world. I am living in my world. You are living in your world. We're not living in the same world anymore. The assumptions that we come to the table with are completely different. It's like playing a game of chess where I have one board and you have another board. And then I make a move and you're like, where did you, that pawn was eliminated. I took that pawn 3 moves ago. How are you moving that pawn? We're not operating from, and this is what's happening with like these algorithms of...
This is the point of my tweet, which apparently some people misunderstood my tweet to assume I was making fun of Republicans, but I wasn't. I was actually pointing at both sides. I think I tweeted a few weeks ago. I was like, on election day, one side is in for like a brutal wake-up call because there were a lot of people on both sides that were like, this is over. We're going to win overwhelming victory. It's no chance or whatever. Like, yeah, and obviously somebody, not both sides can't be right on election day.
Echo chambers and online drift. You get on TikTok or YouTube Shorts or Facebook or whatever. Meta, I don't like, there's some difference. They're not all the same. But we get indoctrinated into a particular view of...
Please make a hate comment towards Tom since he dissed you on stream last night. Tom is one of the worst commentary YouTubers. His content is trash. His research is non-existent. He is just and he's a terrible human being. When I spent time personally with Tom, one of the craziest things about Tom was how much disdain he had for Jewish people and black people, and I was shocked. I couldn't believe what he was like. One of the most disappointing things about Tom is that we went to do that shooting video when we were shooting with the friends that we had on that ranch. We couldn't use like 80% of the footage because every single time we went to shoot, he would insist on going down range and putting up targets of people that were black rappers or Einstein over and over again. I don't know why. It was just like, why? And he was like, no, it helps. And it did. He actually shot so much better when he was aiming at... I'm joking. That's all a joke, by the way. I'm just kidding.
Of the world. This is what's going on in the world. And then another human being is operating off of a different worldview. And so what's happening, and now we get to the really kind of scary part, okay? So I'm not saying that this is good or bad. This is an observation that I'm making. This is going to trigger a lot of people. This is just an observation. It has nothing to do with what I do when I wake up in the morning. So
just curious, is your mind still super quiet on Vyvanse, or was it just a thing from the initial high? No, I still feel it's still good for me.
Right now, what we're starting to see is advocacy based on a shared identity. So we say like, okay, trans rights are really important. Bodily autonomy is really important. Right? Minority rights are really important. Me Too movement. Gamers are really important. Millennials are really important. Gen Z is really important. Gen X is really important. So something subtle has happened. As we started to learn about the patriarchal structure, and as we discovered that the patriarchal structure both helps and harms men, generally speaking, though, the patriarchal structure helps some men way more than most men. I'm not an expert in the patriarchy. Whether you agree with it, disagree with it, we can have that conversation. Here's just what I've observed. So in this conversation of advocacy, there is one group that is absent. Can you guess who that group is?
White men?
Anyone? Who's absent? When we talk about... right? So people are saying furries. So right now, this is just what I've seen.
Gamers.
Right? So there's absolutely evidence that men have it better in many ways than women. And I think a lot of this push for equality makes a lot of sense. So I think we should absolutely make STEM fields more welcoming to women. Absolutely, 100%. We should not tolerate this. I think we should make the gaming space more welcome to women. I think we should see less misogyny. Less racism, less homophobia, transphobia, call it whatever you want. I think everyone should be able to, I think when we're talking about playing games, I think every human being on the planet should have the right to sit down after a hard day of work, play a video game, and have a good time.
And be a little right. Oh.
I'm all for that. I'm a father of daughters. I want them to live in an equal world.
But
so someone once asked me, are you a feminist? And I asked them, what does that mean? Because I hear different, what does the term mean, right? Because that's how I try to understand. And I said, I'm in favor of equality for all peoples. Does that make me a feminist? I'm happy to say that's a belief. I think everyone should have equality. I think equality is great. Equality is good. Does that make me a feminist? And I think what I've seen, and it's really scary, right? So I've seen 80% of suicides being men. I've seen suicides getting worse. I've seen addiction rates that are 3 to 4 times worse for men. I've seen prisons that are full of men. Who's advocating for them? Now, here's the real problem, is that if you try to advocate for them, you get shouted down. Because there's this idea that since the patriarchy is beneficial to men, men don't need a seat at the table, because the whole point of having supporting these other voices is because there's a power imbalance between men and women, or men and white people and minorities, whatever. So the majority person doesn't deserve a seat at the table because we're trying to correct this imbalance. I think there's some merit to that argument, right? So like if things are corrected, need to be corrected because one group has an advantage over another group, fair enough. I think that's valid. I think we should support women in STEM, like I said. At the same time, just because this group of men is advantaged, CEOs are more likely to be over 6 feet tall, fair enough. Should we have more height equality in corporate boardrooms? I'm all for it. But just because really tall, financially successful men who are CEOs are doing great for themselves in our patriarchal society does not mean that 80% of 90% of people who end up in jail, those guys are getting screwed. Number one demographic for workplace injuries, men. What are we doing for safer workplaces? Is that a men's issue? Are we advocating for that? 60%, I think ballpark, 60% of women, 60% of people who graduate from college are women. Or do we have any male-only scholarships? No, we don't need those because men have so many advantages. So I don't think it's either or. I think it's a nuanced issue and both can be true. I think that sometimes men need help and sometimes women need help. I think inequality exists in the world, and we should strive for equality. I don't think the world makes it so that one demographic of people is immune to discrimination. And even as a man, if I advocate for men in this way, people will get mad at me because they'll say, what do you mean? So I think what's going on right now is really scary. I think men are losing their voice because we can't advocate for ourselves. We're not allowed to. We're not allowed a seat at the table because other people have it worse. And I think that used to be true. And it still is true. But the gap is shrinking. So you can look at data on mental health. So I talked about suicidality and I talked about addiction. But women are more likely to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Women are more likely to be diagnosed with a mood disorder. Women are more likely to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. More likely to be diagnosed with an eating disorder. So we all get screwed, depending on our gender, with what we're prone to in terms of mental illness. The really scary thing is we are starting to see equality in mental illness. Rates of addiction and suicide, I don't know about suicide. Rates of addiction are increasing in women. Rates of body dysmorphia are increasing in men. We're seeing more, I think, diagnoses of cluster B, narcissism, sociopathic kind of women, and we're seeing more borderline men. Things are evening out, at least in terms of mental illness. So I think what we saw in this election is super, super scary. But the majority of people in the United States voted for Donald Trump. And I'm not saying that that in and of itself is scary. I think what's scary is that this group of people showed up, and they're there. They've been there. Jordan Peterson pointed them out 6 years ago. And he's like, what's your plan to engage with these people? We don't give them a voice. We don't allow them to have a voice. I want y'all, and the great example of this is watch what happens to me when I say this. When someone says, I don't have a voice, and the society says, you are wrong, you do have a voice, they're taking away my voice. This is something, by the way, that I learned as a psychiatrist from my female patients. I started to see what it was like to lose your voice. When you speak and you say, this is my experience, and no one is letting me speak. And then people are like, yeah, we are letting you speak. You're just doing a bad job, or you're not doing it right, or whatever. And I think what happened is a huge group of disenfranchised, probably men, voted for Donald Trump. And the reason that we all got caught off guard is because when they open their mouths, we don't listen. If they say something, they get called Nazis. They get called...
I think it's all part of it.